Imagine waking up on a peaceful Sunday morning, the sun rising over crystal blue Hawaiian waters, sailors enjoying their day off, some still sleeping in their bunks, families preparing for church, and then suddenly, without warning, the sky erupts in fire and death, transforming paradise into an inferno within seconds. And in just 90 minutes, over 2,400 Americans lie dead. The Pacific Fleet lies shattered, and the United States finds itself dragged into the deadliest conflict in human history. This is the story of December 7th, 1941, the day that will live in infamy, the day Pearl Harbor burned. But here's what most people don't know. The attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't just a surprise military strike. It was the culmination of decades of rising tensions, failed diplomacy, and a desperate gamble by Japan that would ultimately seal its own fate. And the warning signs were there, scattered like puzzle pieces that no one put together until it was too late. The story begins not on that fateful Sunday morning in Hawaii, but decades earlier, across the vast Pacific Ocean in Japan itself, when Commodore Matthew Perry arrived with his black ships in the 1850s, forcibly opening Japan to the Western world after centuries of isolation, an event that would trigger a revolutionary transformation in Japanese society. Within just a few decades, Japan threw aside its feudal traditions and rebuilt itself into a modern industrial powerhouse, with a formidable military machine, rapidly climbing the ladder to become a great power through victorious wars against China in 1894 to 95, and shockingly defeating Russia in 1904 to 05, proving that this island empire could challenge and beat nations far larger than itself. Japan's strategy was always the same: strike first, strike fast, strike hard, and win before the enemy could mobilize their superior resources. A pattern that would repeat itself at Pearl Harbor. But Japan's very success created a new problem. As it rose in power and ambition, it found itself in direct competition with the United States for dominance in the Pacific. And by the 1930s, tensions were reaching a boiling point. In 1937, Japan launched a brutal invasion of China, seeking to create an empire and secure the natural resources its island nation desperately needed. But the war in China didn't go as planned. Instead of a quick victory, Japan found itself trapped in a quagmire, with over 1 million soldiers bogged down in an endless conflict they couldn't win. And their response to Chinese resistance was horrifying. The policy of kill all, burn all, loot all terrorized civilians, and cities like Nanking suffered unspeakable atrocities, with hundreds of thousands of innocent people slaughtered in what became known as the Rape of Nanking. President Franklin D. Roosevelt watched Japan's aggression with growing alarm, and he decided to fight back not with bullets, but with economics. He imposed embargoes on arms in 1937, scrap iron in 1938, and crucially oil in 1941, attempting to strangle Japan's war machine by cutting off the resources it desperately needed. And this is where the fuse began burning toward Pearl Harbor. But here's the strategic dilemma Japan faced. They were trapped. They couldn't win in China without resources. They couldn't get resources without expanding southward into European colonies in Southeast Asia, rich with rubber, tin, and oil. But they couldn't expand south without triggering war with the United States. And they couldn't fight the United States unless they first crippled America's ability to intervene. It was a vicious circle that led Japanese military planners to one conclusion. They needed to strike first, and strike so devastatingly that America would be knocked out before the war even began. Enter Admiral Yamamoto, the brilliant architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. And here's the irony that would define this entire tragedy. Yamamoto had studied at Harvard University. He had lived in America. He knew American industrial power and the American spirit, and he actually opposed going to war with the United States, believing Japan couldn't win a prolonged conflict. But when his government decided on war anyway, Yamamoto did his duty, and he planned an attack so audacious, so unprecedented in naval history, that it would either win the war in one blow or doom Japan forever. Yamamoto's plan was revolutionary. sail all 6 of Japan's precious aircraft carriers across 3,000 miles of open ocean in complete secrecy, approach Hawaii from the north where they would never be expected, launch a massive airstrike at dawn on a Sunday when defenses would be relaxed, destroy the American battleships at anchor, and cripple the US Pacific Fleet before it could respond. On paper, it was brilliant, but it relied on one crucial element: total surprise. And this is where our story takes a darker turn. Because the question that has haunted historians for over 80 years is, could Pearl Harbor have been prevented? Were there warning signs that were ignored? And did anyone in Washington know what was coming? The truth is complicated and controversial. There were indeed warning signs, scattered fragments of intelligence that, if pieced together, might have revealed Japan's intentions. American cryptographers had broken some Japanese diplomatic codes and knew war was imminent. Radar operators spotted incoming aircraft that morning, but were told not to worry. A Japanese submarine was sunk at the harbor entrance an hour before the air attack, but the alarm wasn't raised. Diplomatic relations were clearly breaking down, with Japanese envoys still negotiating in Washington, even as the attack force sailed toward Hawaii, and multiple intelligence reports suggested Japan was planning military action. But here's the critical failure. No one connected the dots. No one imagined Japan would be bold enough to attack Pearl Harbor directly. Most officials expected an attack somewhere in Southeast Asia or the Philippines, and the information was scattered across different departments and agencies that didn't communicate effectively. Some conspiracy theorists claim Roosevelt knew about the attack in advance and let it happen to bring America into World War II. But historians have thoroughly debunked this theory. The reality was more mundane and more tragic. It was a colossal intelligence failure, a failure of imagination, a failure of communication, and a failure to believe Japan would take such an enormous gamble. Now let's go back to Hawaii, to the morning of December 7th, 1941, where everything is about to change. It was a beautiful Sunday morning. Clear blue skies, the kind of perfect Hawaiian weather that made Pearl Harbor seem like paradise. Sailors were sleeping in after Saturday Night Liberty. Officers were having breakfast with their families, and at 7:02 a.m., 2 Army radar operators at Opana Point spotted something strange on their screen. A massive formation of aircraft approaching from the north. But when they reported it to their supervisor, inexperienced Lieutenant Kermit Tyler made a fateful decision. He assumed they were American B-17 bombers expected to arrive from California that morning, and he told them, "Don't worry about it." Those 5 words would haunt him for the rest of his life. At 7:48 a.m., the first wave of 183 Japanese aircraft descended on Pearl Harbor like a swarm of hornets, and the lead pilot, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, looked down at the American warships lined up neatly in rows, completely unprepared, and he radioed back the code words that confirmed total surprise. Tora, 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 Tiger, 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 and then hell erupted on Earth. The Japanese attack was executed with precision and devastating effect. Dive bombers screamed down from the sky. Torpedo bombers skimmed low over the water, releasing their deadly payloads. Fighter planes strafed anything that moved. And the sound was apocalyptic. Bombs exploding, torpedoes striking steel hulls, ammunition detonating, men screaming, and the entire harbor transforming into an inferno of smoke, fire, and death. Battleship Row became the center of destruction. The mighty warships of the US Pacific Fleet, symbols of American naval power, were sitting ducks lined up neatly along Ford Island, and one by one they were hit. The USS Oklahoma capsized within minutes, trapping hundreds of men inside its hull. The USS West Virginia took multiple torpedo hits and began to sink. The USS California was crippled. The USS Nevada tried to make a run for open sea, heroically getting underway despite heavy damage. But more bombs found her and she had to be beached to avoid blocking the harbor entrance. And then came the most catastrophic moment of the entire attack. At 8:10 a.m., Just 15 minutes into the attack, a 1,760-pound armor-piercing bomb dropped from a high-altitude bomber struck the USS Arizona, penetrated her deck armor, and detonated in her forward magazine, where over 1 million pounds of gunpowder was stored. The explosion was so massive, so violent, that the entire forward section of the battleship erupted in a fireball that shot flames 500 feet into the air. The shockwave was felt across the entire harbor. The Arizona sank in less than 9 minutes, and 1,177 men died in that single moment. Almost half of all American deaths that day occurred on that one ship, and most of those men are still entombed in the Arizona's hole at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, a mass grave that remains a sacred memorial to this day. But amidst the death and destruction, stories of incredible courage emerged. Sailors fought back with whatever weapons they could find, manning anti-aircraft guns even as their ships were sinking beneath them. Rescue crews rushed into burning compartments to save trapped shipmates. Civilians grabbed weapons and joined the fight, and one sailor, Doris Miller, an African-American mess attendant who wasn't supposed to be in combat because of segregation laws, grabbed a .50 caliber machine gun he'd never been trained to use and shot down at least 2 Japanese planes, becoming one of the heroes of Pearl Harbor and later receiving the Navy Cross. The attack came in 2 waves. The first wave focused on the battleships and caused the most damage, but there was a brief lull around 8:40 a.m. when the Japanese aircraft returned to their carriers to rearm and refuel, giving defenders a desperate chance to organize, and then at 8:54 a.m., the second wave of 170 aircraft arrived, continuing the destruction for another hour, targeting hangars, airfields, and any ships that were still afloat. When the attack finally ended around 9:45 a.m., after less than 2 hours, Pearl Harbor looked like the end of the world. Thick, black smoke rose thousands of feet into the air, visible from miles away. Oil burning on the water's surface created an inferno that trapped and killed swimmers. The harbor was filled with wreckage and bodies. 188 US aircraft were destroyed, and another 159 damaged. 19 ships were sunk or badly damaged, including 8 battleships, and 2,403 Americans were dead, with another 1,178 wounded. But here's the crucial strategic detail that would determine the course of the entire Pacific War. Japan's attack, devastating as it was, missed the most important targets. The US aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, were not in port that day. They were out at sea on various missions, and they survived intact, which meant America still had the ability to project air power across the Pacific. And Admiral Yamamoto understood immediately that his victory was incomplete. He allegedly wrote in his diary, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Though historians debate whether he actually said these words, they captured the essential truth of what Japan had done. News of the attack spread across America with shocking speed. Radio broadcasts interrupted regular programming. Newspaper boys ran through streets shouting, "Extra! Extra! Pearl Harbor bombed!" And Americans gathered around radios in disbelief, unable to comprehend that their nation had been attacked, that thousands of American servicemen were dead, and that their country was now at war. On December 8th, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before a joint session of Congress and delivered one of the most famous speeches in American history, declaring December 7th, 1941, as a date which will live in infamy, and asking Congress to declare war on Japan. Congress approved in less than 24 hours, then an hour with only one dissenting vote, and 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, bringing America fully into World War II in both the Pacific and Europe. The aftermath of Pearl Harbor transformed America in ways that are hard to overstate. Isolationism vanished overnight, millions of young men rushed to enlist, women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers to support the war effort, and American industry mobilized with astonishing speed, producing ships, planes, tanks, and weapons on a scale the world had never seen. But there was also a dark side to America's response. Fear and prejudice led to one of the most shameful episodes in American history: the internment of over 120,000 Japanese Americans, most of them US citizens, who were forcibly removed from their homes and imprisoned in camps for years, despite having nothing to do with the attack, a violation of civil liberties that America would later officially apologize for. Japan's attack achieved tactical success, but strategic catastrophe. In the short term, they crippled the Pacific Fleet and bought time to seize territory across Southeast Asia, capturing Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, the Philippines, and numerous Pacific islands in a stunning series of victories in early 1942. But in the long term, Pearl Harbor was Japan's greatest mistake because it united American public opinion like nothing else could have. It brought the world's greatest industrial power into the war with total commitment, and it ensured that Japan would face an enemy with resources and determination far beyond anything they could match. The tide began to turn just 6 months later at the Battle of Midway in June 1942, where American aircraft carriers, the same carriers that had survived Pearl Harbor, destroyed 4 Japanese carriers in a stunning victory that shifted the balance of naval power in the Pacific forever. And from that point forward, Japan was on the defensive, slowly being pushed back across the Pacific in brutal island hopping campaigns that would last until 1945. The war that Pearl Harbor started would continue for nearly 4 more years, claiming millions of lives across the Pacific, culminating in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, and finally ending with Japan's surrender on September 2nd, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The same nation that had launched such a devastating surprise attack had been utterly defeated, occupied, and transformed. Today, the wreckage of the USS Arizona still lies at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, and the USS Arizona Memorial stands above it, built directly over the sunken battleship. Visitors can look down through the water and see the rusting hull of the ship. And even now, over 80 years later, oil still leaks from the Arizona's fuel tanks, rising to the surface in small droplets that people call the tears of the Arizona. And over 900 sailors remain entombed in that ship, their final resting place marked by a white marble memorial where their names are inscribed on a wall. The lessons of Pearl Harbor continue to resonate through history. It taught America never to let its guard down. It demonstrated the importance of intelligence gathering and analysis. It showed the danger of underestimating enemies. And it proved that surprise attacks can change the course of history in a single morning. And these lessons have shaped American military and diplomatic strategy ever since. From the Cold War to the War on Terror. Pearl Harbor also left a complex legacy in Japan. For decades, Japanese society struggled with how to remember the war, with some seeing themselves as victims of American atomic weapons and firebombing, while others acknowledged Japan's aggression and atrocities. And even today, different societies remember the Pearl Harbor attack very differently. Americans remember it as a day of infamy, a treacherous sneak attack that forced America into war, while some in Japan remember it as a desperate act by a nation backed into a corner by economic sanctions. Though this narrative ignores Japan's brutal aggression in China and across Asia, the human stories from Pearl Harbor remain powerful and poignant. Survivors carried the memories of that morning for the rest of their lives, many suffering from what we now call PTSD. And every year on December 7th, fewer and fewer survivors remain to tell their stories, and soon there will be none left, which makes it even more important to remember what happened and why it matters. What makes the Pearl Harbor story so enduringly powerful is not just the military history or the political consequences, but the human drama. The young sailors who died before their lives truly began, the heroes who fought back against impossible odds, The families shattered by sudden loss, the nation transformed by tragedy, and the reminder that history can turn on a single moment, that peace can become war in an instant, and that the decisions of leaders can doom millions to death and suffering. The attack on Pearl Harbor killed 2,403 Americans in less than 2 hours. But the war it triggered would kill over 400,000 Americans and millions more across the globe before it ended. It destroyed the Japanese Empire, reshaped the global order, created the modern world we live in today with America as a superpower, and left scars that still haven't fully healed. And it all began on that Sunday morning in Hawaii, when the sky filled with enemy planes and paradise became hell. So when we remember December 7th, 1941, we're not just remembering a military defeat or a surprise attack. We're remembering a moment when everything changed, when America lost its innocence, when the world went to war, and when thousands of young Americans made the ultimate sacrifice. And we're reminded that freedom is never guaranteed, that vigilance is always necessary, and that the price of peace is eternal watchfulness, because as Pearl Harbor taught us, disaster can strike when we least expect it, and the world can change forever in just 90 minutes. This is the story of Pearl Harbor, a story of tragedy and heroism, of failure and courage, of destruction and rebirth, and most importantly, a story that must never be forgotten. Because those who died that day, those who fought back, those who survived, and those who carried the memory forward deserve to be remembered, and their sacrifice demands that we learn the lessons of history so that such a catastrophe might never happen again. And that is why, more than 8 decades later, we still gather to remember December 7th, 1941, the day that will forever live in infamy. If you found this story interesting, make sure to check out my other video on Unit 731, one of the darkest and most disturbing secret programs in World War II. Click the video appearing on your screen now to uncover its dark secrets.